There is no romance here, no heroism, no hope for glory. There is only survival, pain, endless exhaustion, and a constant sense of looming danger. The protagonist of this story is you. What awaits you is a tale filled with such vivid details that you might just want to fall asleep and forget how cruel, filthy, and indifferent this world truly is. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, get comfortable. We're about to begin. You wake up to the sensation of a cold drop landing squarely in the hollow just above your eyebrow, following a slow trail down your cheek. The roof has been leaking for so long that you wonder if perhaps the drip is just another fixture of your home, as natural and inevitable as the creaking of the timbers. It is not even dawn, but already the air inside your hut is heavy and damp. The thatched roof has rotted in more places than you care to count. On windy nights, you lie in bed, watching the shadows dance on the sagging ceiling, and imagine the whole thing finally giving in, collapsing with the weight of 10 years' worth of moss, rain, and regret. Your bed is a heap of straw stuffed into an old sack, now so compressed and blackened with moisture that it could easily be mistaken for a forgotten heap of compost. The fleas like it, at least. You have come to know them well. Some nights, it seems there are more fleas than there is straw. Every movement causes a tiny storm of them to scatter, only to return as soon as you settle in again. You scratch, and the familiar sensation of grit and dried blood beneath your fingernails tells you that you were scratching in your sleep. Your skin is already a patchwork of bites, old scars, and the occasional rash. The room itself is small, barely enough for you to stand up straight. The floor is made of earth, churned up into ridges and muddy puddles by your own bare feet. Somewhere in the corner, the ashes of last night's fire are still faintly warm. You can see the tiny footprints of a rat weaving their way through the soot. You try not to think about how many rats came in the night. Your food is always at risk. Sometimes you suspect that the rats and you are locked in a never ending game, each of you taking turns stealing from the other. You inhale. The scent is overwhelming. Damp wood, old straw, burnt fat, something sour and fungal lurking just at the edge of notice. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar. You have stopped noticing it, mostly. When you first moved in, how many years ago was it? 10, maybe 12. You tried desperately to clean, to chase out the mold, to patch the cracks with mud and hope. It did not help. The mold is stronger than hope. The only change is your own resignation. You shift your legs off the straw pile, and your feet meet the floor with a cold, wet squelch. For a moment, you sit in silence, staring at your toes. You flex them, watching mud ooze up between them. Is it mud or something else? You try not to think about it. Better not to wonder what secrets the ground is hiding. Your joints ache as you stretch. You are not old, not really, but your back says otherwise. Every morning, it takes longer to stand up straight, as if your body is slowly being reclaimed by the same damp earth that you tread on every day. You are a body artist, a maker of marks, a tattooist of the poor and the desperate. But before you can ink a single line, you must face the daily reality of life in this small, forgotten corner of the world. You run your fingers through your tangled hair and wince as you encounter a particularly stubborn knot. There is a glimmer of something pale, an egg, perhaps. You will have to pick through later. For now, you focus on the next task. Surviving another day. There is no candle to light. You have long since used the last stub. Instead, you fumble in the half light for your tools. Your workspace is a rough plank set atop two stones. Your implements are wrapped in a piece of dirty linen, stained with old blood and pigment. You open the bundle and inspect your needles, made from sharpened bone and fish spines. Some of them are splintered. You will need to find time to make new ones, but that means venturing outside, and outside is cold. You pull your ragged tunic over your head and tie it with a frayed rope. You are already shivering. In the corner, a battered wooden cup holds the last of your drinking water, thick with floating dust and, you suspect, a few drowned insects. You drink anyway. You tell yourself the protein will do you good. The morning brings with it the first sounds of gape outside, a cockerel crowing in the distance, the clatter of a neighbor's door, the faint noise of arguing from the street. You wonder who your first customer will be today. Some days there are none. Some days they line up, anxious to receive your art, your protection, or just an excuse to escape their own miserable routines. You hope for the latter. The coin is rarely enough, but the gossip can be almost as valuable. You keep your ear tuned to the stories, the rumors, the shifting sands of survival in a world where a single careless word can mean the difference between life and death. You run your hands over your face, feeling the roughness of your own unshaven cheeks. You laugh, softly and without humor. Today will be like every other day, cold, dirty, dangerous, and perhaps just a little bit memorable. Or maybe it will be the day the roof finally falls in. Either way, you rise to meet it. Before you can even think about artistry or survival, you must face the daily enemy that never relents, never sleeps, and certainly never bathes. You know them intimately. They are your constant companions, your secret tormentors. Lice. The louse is a loyal friend to the medieval body artist. So much so that you have begun to wonder if perhaps your true calling was not marking skin, but providing a moving banquet for colonies of crawling insects. You run your fingers through your hair and feel the familiar crawling itch, an army of tiny legs marching across your scalp. No one is immune, not the wealthy, not the holy, and certainly not you. Perhaps you are especially favored, as your work brings you close to many bodies, heads pressed together as you examine skin, hands kneading flesh to find the right angle, breath mingling with the scent of sweat and unwashed hair. With every customer comes the possibility of reinforcements for your ever growing population of lice. You pick at your scalp and dislodge a few prisoners. They try to scurry away, but your nails are too fast. One is crushed under a dirty thumb, its insides smearing against your skin with a faintly satisfying crunch. You inspect the tiny corpse, then flick it into the straw. That is the ritual: catch, crush, inspect, and discard. You have grown so used to this that you can do it with your eyes closed, and often do, during the long, dark hours when sleep refuses to come. Some mornings you try to comb them out with a wooden comb you carved yourself years ago. The teeth are too wide and the wood splinters, catching on tangles of hair and scabs alike. You wince as you pull, but you keep going. There is no such thing as a gentle touch in this world. You think about shaving your head, as some have done, but then you remember how easily the cold creeps in through bare skin. Baldness is a punishment that winter doles out mercilessly. If only lice were the end of your worries. You know they are but the most visible pests. There are others, fleas that leap with acrobatic determination, bed bugs that find the most sensitive places to bite, and a host of parasites so small you can only sense their presence by the itching, the rash, the sores that never quite heal. But the lice are special. They are a badge of your profession. The marks you leave on your clients' bodies may fade, but the ones left by lice are always fresh. You have heard of remedies, of course. Some say that vinegar helps, but vinegar is for food, not for luxury. Others suggest ash, or boiled herbs, or the blood of a black rooster. Once, in desperation, you tried washing your hair in freezing river water mixed with ashes. The result was shivering misery and a head full of slightly cleaner lice. Sometimes you envy the wealthy who have servants to pick through their hair for them, but then you remember that even lords scratch themselves raw at night, and you find a small, grim satisfaction in the universality of discomfort. Your clients bring their own infestations. Some come with their hair crawling, their necks lined with red bites, their collars sprinkled with louse eggs like the first frost of autumn. They sit before you, scratching, wincing, apologizing for their filth. You reassure them. It is normal. You say this not to comfort them, but because it is the truth. To be clean is to be an outcast, a suspicious figure who has clearly made some unholy pact or lives in isolation. No, you are part of the world, and the world is full of lice. When you work, you sometimes find yourself distracted. The sight of a louse crawling from a client's eyebrow, or the sensation of one journeying across your own cheek, breaking your concentration. You pause, excuse yourself, and squeeze it between your nails. The client nods, understanding. There is no shame, only resignation. Everyone is itchy. Everyone is scratching. It is a symphony of discomfort, and you are both musicians and audience. There is a certain artistry to it, you suppose. The pattern of bites and scabs can be read like a map, a record of your struggles. You can tell which nights you scratched too hard, which days the infestation was especially fierce. Your own skin bears the scars, thin, red lines that weave across your scalp, your neck, your wrists. You imagine a historian, centuries hence, discovering your remains and wondering about these marks, never suspecting the truth that you were simply food, an unwilling participant in the endless feast. Sometimes, when you are feeling philosophical, which is rare, you think about how the lice bind you to the world, to your clients, to the cycle of poverty and filth that no one escapes. They are democratic, these parasites, uninterested in status or wealth, caring only for warmth and blood. You imagine them as tiny critics, crawling over your skin, passing judgment on your art and your hygiene alike. They are never satisfied. Perhaps that is the real lesson of the louse. Nothing you do will ever be enough, and the struggle never ends. You finish your morning inspection, comb and nails slick with the evidence of battle. You know that by midday, the itch will return. By nightfall, you will be scratching again, and the lice will have reclaimed whatever territory you briefly won. You sigh, shoulders slumping, and reach for your tools. The day awaits. The lice will not care if you are late, but your customers might. You tell yourself that you will try another remedy soon, maybe tomorrow or the day after. For now, there are more pressing concerns than a few thousand hungry insects. You always knew that the life of an artist would involve a certain amount of hunger, but the reality has surpassed all possible expectations. You shuffle to your kitchen, which is simply a shelf above the dampest part of the floor, where you keep your food elevated in a futile attempt to keep the rats at bay. They are cleverer than you, of course, and your food stores are forever under siege. You suspect they think of you as the interloper here, a slightly larger rodent who happens to walk upright and knows how to light a fire. This morning's breakfast is, as always, a small drama. You reach for the round, lumpy thing that you know, in theory, began its life as bread. In your hands, it has the density of a brick and the look of a failed experiment. There is a crust, yes, but it is less a protective layer and more a defensive weapon. You attempt to break it, and your efforts send crumbs and dust flying into the shadows, where the rats will no doubt appreciate your generosity later. Inside, the bread is a damp, sour mass, shot through with black streaks of mold and occasional fragments of what may have once been grain. You debate whether it is wise to eat it, or if this will be the day when the bread finally does you in. Your stomach answers for you, growling loud enough to scare a nearby beetle. You break off a piece and chew slowly, listening to your teeth protest. At least it is something to chew. You cannot remember the last time you experienced anything that could be described as crisp or fresh. The closest you come to fresh is when the rain leaks through the ceiling, and even then, it does not make the bread any softer. Some days, you are lucky enough to find a piece of dried meat or a lump of hard cheese hiding in the corners of your food box. Today, All you discover is a shriveled apple, half eaten by worms and nearly translucent with rot. You cut away the worst bits with your knife, a tool you keep sharper than your wits for just this purpose, and swallow the rest. The taste is sour and metallic, but at least it breaks the monotony. Occasionally, there are surprises. You bite down and feel an unfamiliar crunch. You pause, tongue exploring the gritty mouthful, and realize with a dull resignation that you have encountered the droppings of a mouse. You have heard that some people remove these when they find them, but you simply shrug and keep eating. Protein is protein, and besides, you are late for the day's work. Your cup is filled with yesterday's water, left uncovered to collect a thin film of dust, and, for a moment, a curious fly. You fish the fly out and sip, grimacing at the taste. It is lukewarm, slightly murky, and tastes faintly of the clay cup itself. At least it is wet. You wonder, as you often do, whether you will be ill later. You think about the rumors that clean water is for the dead, and how much water it would take to wash away all the filth you have ingested over the years. You decide you do not have enough water for philosophy. The meal ends as it always does, with a few unsatisfying bites, a mouthful of regret, and the certainty that hunger will return long before you can afford to eat again. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, adding another dark stain to the collection. There is a certain artistry to the layering of grime and grease on your clothing, a kind of living tapestry that tells the story of every meal, every spill, every missed opportunity to wash. The rats come out now, bold in the weak morning light. They nose through the crumbs you dropped, squeaking with excitement. One looks at you with small, intelligent eyes. You wonder if you are kin, bonded by shared hardship and mutual scavenging. You toss it a fragment of bread and watch it vanish into the shadows. At least someone will eat well today. Sometimes you fantasize about feasts, tables laden with roasted meats, fresh fruit, soft cheeses, sweet pastries. The images are so vivid you can almost taste them, but you know better than to dwell on dreams. You have seen what happens to those who let their desires run wild in a world like this. Starvation is a patient predator, and hope is its favorite seasoning. You remind yourself that breakfast is not meant to be enjoyed. It is fuel, nothing more. You are alive, and that is victory enough for now. You tell yourself that others have it worse. Some days, you almost believe it. You have heard stories of artists who survived on even less, who subsisted on the peelings from someone else's table, or the bones the dogs refused. You cling to these stories the way a drowning man clings to driftwood, unsure whether they will save you or only delay the inevitable. Your hands are sticky with crumbs and grease as you gather your tools for the day ahead. You lick your fingers clean and wince at the aftertaste. Breakfast is over. Hunger remains. The day begins again, as it always does, with the promise of more work, more hunger, and perhaps, if fortune smiles, a moment of forgetfulness between one bite and the next. You are ready, or as ready as anyone can be, to face the world outside your hovel. Your belly rumbles again, a low and mournful drumbeat. You ignore it. There will be time enough for hunger later. For now, there is work to do, and work is the closest thing to sustenance you can hope for. Before the first client's timid knock, you must tend to the sacred ritual of preparation, a ceremony that, in your hands, is equal parts craft and desperation. You approach your workbench, if it can be called that, which is nothing more than a plank balanced on two uneven stones, its surface warped and darkened with years of spilled ink, dried blood, and an ever present layer of dust. This is your altar, your laboratory, your battlefield. Your tools are laid out with care, not because you cherish them, but because you fear losing even a single one. Every needle, every sliver of bone, every splinter of iron has its story, usually involving a week's worth of scrounging or a bruised knuckle from the marketplace. You unwrap your linen bundle and take inventory. 3 bone needles, one just beginning to split at the tip. A pair of sharpened fish spines, brittle but serviceable. A rusty iron pin, long enough to double as a weapon should the need arise. And your prized possession, a small knife with an edge so thin it almost disappears when you hold it to the light. The needles themselves are darkened with age and use. You run a thumb along each one, feeling for burrs, cracks, and the sticky residue of yesterday's work. There is no question of boiling water or scrubbing with soap. Water is precious, soap is for the clergy, and the best you can hope for is to wipe the implements with a bit of cloth and spit, muttering a curse or a prayer depending on your mood. You know that infection is a constant risk. Every tool is a loaded die, waiting to decide the fate of your next customer. Pigments are another matter. The village apothecary once told you that true artists use rare minerals and precious stones, but you have never had the coin for luxury. Instead, you gather what the earth and your own ingenuity provide. Today, your palette consists of a rough mound of ochre, ground from rocks you scavenged near the stream, a tiny bag of lampblack scraped from the inside of your cooking pot, and a mysterious bluish powder obtained from a traveling peddler who swore it would make the marks last until death or longer. You have no reason to doubt him. Most of your clients do not live long enough to test the claim. Mixing pigments is a dance of necessity and invention. You empty a handful of ochre into your mortar, which is nothing more than a chipped bowl stolen from a tavern kitchen, and begin to grind it with the heel of a broken spoon. The powder is gritty, stubborn, clinging to the sides of the bowl as if it too wishes to avoid its fate. You add a little spit, sometimes water, when you are feeling extravagant, and mash the mixture into a paste. The smell is earthy, metallic, and faintly sour. If you are lucky, no insects have drowned in it overnight. You reach for the lampblack, fingers already stained from the ochre. This pigment is precious, and you treat it like gold dust. It takes hours to scrape enough from the sooty underside of your pot, and your lungs still burn from the effort. The powder is as fine as flour, so light that the smallest breath scatters it. You add a careful pinch to a second bowl and work it into a thick, greasy sludge using a drop of animal fat rendered from a scrap of gristle. The result is a black so deep it seems to swallow the light, and for a moment you almost feel pride. The blue powder is a gamble. You do not know what it is made from. Some say it is crushed stones from distant lands. Others whisper that it is poison. You have seen blue tattoos that turned green, or worse, that festered into wounds that never closed. Still, customers ask for color, and who are you to argue with fashion? You dip a needle into the powder and mix it with a few drops of water, watching as it blooms into an unnatural shade. You will use it sparingly and only on those who insist. You arrange your makeshift ink pots in a crooked row and glance at your fingers. They are already stained with reds and blacks, the skin dry and cracked from years of handling harsh powders and animal grease. Your nails are rimmed with grime, impossible to scrub clean with the meager soap you occasionally steal from the bathhouse. Once you dreamed of keeping your hands as soft and nimble as a court musician's, but the world has other plans. From a hook on the wall, you take down your rag, once white, now mottled with a century's worth of stains. You use it to wipe your tools, then your hands, then your nose, in no particular order. It is both towel and apron, and sometimes, when the cold becomes too much, you wrap it around your neck and pretend it is a scarf. You wonder if great artists in faraway cities have such rituals, or if their servants do the dirty work while they contemplate beauty and immortality. A knock at the door startles you. You are not ready, not truly, not ever, but the day waits for no one. You sweep your pigments into a corner of the table, cover your needles with the rag, and force a smile onto your face. Perhaps the first client will bring coin, or news, or at the very least, a new story for you to add to the growing collection of disappointments and disasters that is your life. Before you answer, you glance at your tools one last time, and a thought comes unbidden. These are the true artists here, not you. They shape the world, draw blood, leave scars that last a lifetime. You are just the hands that hold them, stained and trembling, as temporary as the morning mist. You breathe deeply, catching the familiar scents of iron, earth, and old sweat, and open the door. The world outside is waiting, and your hands, however filthy, however flawed, are all you have to meet it. The first make is never gentle. It is more of a pounding, impatient, almost desperate, because those who come to your door at dawn are rarely there for pleasure. You know without looking that it will be a peasant, or perhaps a soldier, a man with rough hands and a haunted look in his eyes. Someone who understands that pain is the price of survival and sometimes the only coin that can buy a moment's protection or fleeting hope. You open the door to find exactly that. A pair of peasants, faces red from the cold, shoulders hunched beneath coarse cloaks that do nothing to block the morning wind. Behind them looms a soldier, or at least the closest thing this place has to one, a young man with a patchy beard and a spear that is more splinter than weapon. His armor is a patchwork of rust and old leather, held together with string, hope, and the occasional stolen nail. All three shuffle into your hut, bringing with them a cloud of sweat, manure, and the unmistakable scent of dread. They do not speak at first. Instead, they cast nervous glances at your tools, at the wall of strange symbols and faded drawings you keep for inspiration, and at each other. Finally, one of the peasants finds his courage. He pulls up a sleeve to reveal a forearm as pale as milk, crisscrossed with scars from brambles, burns, and what you suspect is more than one failed attempt at self doctoring. He wants a cross, he says, a simple one to ward off evil, to keep the nightmares away, to prove to his neighbors that he is not cursed. You nod, already knowing the story. Every peasant has a reason for their marks: protection from wolves, from disease, from witches and spirits, and the thousand invisible threats that haunt every field and hovel. You know, of course, that the only thing your art truly protects against is a lack of conversation, but you do not say this. You dip your bone needle into the lampblack, steady your hand, and begin the slow, deliberate work of marking the flesh. The first prick always makes them flinch. They try to hide it, but you see the tremor in their muscles, the way their breath catches, the way their free hand curls into a fist. You move carefully, methodically, pushing the needle into the skin, wiping away the blood, packing the pigment deep where it will last. You talk to them gently, asking about their families, their crops, the weather. The answers are always the same: bad, worse, and hopeless. But the words are a balm against the pain, for you as much as for them. As you work, the soldier paces the room, tapping his spear against the dirt floor. He has a request, too. He wants a bird, a crude outline of a crow or a raven, he does not care which, on his chest, above his heart. For luck, he says, though you suspect it is more for bravado, a mark to show the others that he is not afraid, that he is different, that he has paid for something no one else can steal. You finish the peasant's cross and bandage his arm with a strip of filthy linen. He presses a coin into your hand, a battered copper worn smooth by 100 trades, and mutters his thanks. The other peasant wants the same mark, but smaller, on his ankle. He is quiet, almost ashamed, as if afraid someone will see. You oblige, knowing that shame is as common as dirt in these parts, and about as easy to wash away. The soldier sits with a grimace, unbuttoning his shirt to reveal a chest crisscrossed with scars. Some old, some fresh, some clearly self inflicted in moments of boredom or despair. You sketch the outline with a bit of charcoal, tracing the lines with a practiced hand. The bird is nothing special, just a few strokes, but he looks at it with a mixture of pride and terror, as if you have given him a shield made of magic and iron. You begin the painful work of driving the needle in, over and over, each puncture a reminder that art and agony are siblings, bound together by necessity and tradition. The soldier grits his teeth, refusing to show pain, but sweat beads on his brow. You smell fear, sharp and sour, beneath the stink of old leather and unwashed skin. As you work, you think about the strange intimacy of your profession. You are closer to these men than their wives, their priests, even their mothers. You see their secrets, their old wounds, their hopes etched in skin and scar tissue. You wonder if they will survive the winter, if the mark you give them will be the last thing anyone remembers. When it is done, the soldier stands, fastening his shirt with shaking hands. He pays with 2 coins, a fortune by your standards, though still barely enough to buy a full loaf of bread. He thanks you, but there is no warmth in it. These are not gifts, these are not luxuries. They are weapons, wards, desperate bargains struck with fate. They leave as they came, huddled and silent, disappearing into the gray morning mist. You watch them go, feeling the ache in your hands and the bitter taste of futility in your mouth. You know that half your clients will be dead within a year by war, by disease, by hunger or accident. Their marks will outlast them, faint lines in the dirt, memories carved in blood and pigment and pain. You clean your tools as best you can and wait for the next knock. The day has only just begun, and already you are tired. You soon learn that in this world, ink and blood are never enough. Every client comes to your door dragging a tangled skein of fears and ancient stories, a private tapestry of rituals they insist must be honored if you are to mark their skin without cursing their souls. You have become an unwilling connoisseur of superstition. Sometimes it feels as though the true art you practice is not in the ink, but in your ability to navigate a labyrinth of small rituals, whispered charms, and complicated bargains with the unseen. The peasant you tattooed at dawn hesitated at your door, pressing his hand to the wood and muttering a rhyme you have heard 1,000 times, something about wolves, winter, and the blessings of Saint Hubert. He spat over his left shoulder as he crossed your threshold, careful not to look at the bone needles directly, lest they see him first. The ritual is supposed to fool evil spirits into ignoring him, but you have your doubts about how easily spirits are fooled. You are expected to participate too. It is never enough to simply make marks. Your clients insist that you recite words, never quite the same, but always solemn, always with the promise of protection. Some days it is an old prayer, mumbled in the local dialect and badly remembered. Other times, it is a piece of doggerel passed down through so many generations that it barely resembles speech. For the blood that spills and the pain that burns, may this mark hold the world at bay, or something to that effect. You are not sure it matters. The sound is what counts. The sense that some boundary has been drawn, however flimsy. There are other demands. Before you touch needle to skin, many insist you pass your tools over a flame. Not to clean them, cleanliness is for priests and doctors, but to chase out the bad air, the miasma that brings illness and misfortune. You humor them, holding your bone needle over a candle stub until it smokes and smells faintly of charred marrow. The ritual complete, you can begin. The client's eyes are wide, as if the ghosts of 1,000 ancestors are watching, eager to see if you will slip, if you will forget a single step and doom the family for 7 generations. Some bring small tokens, bits of iron, dried herbs, a fragment of cloth tied around their wrist. These must be touched, blessed, sometimes even incorporated into the process. You have pressed a penny against a fresh tattoo, buried a thorn beneath a bandage, and once, at a particularly anxious mother's insistence, wrapped a lock of hair around your needle before you worked. Each ritual has a story behind it, always tragic, always slightly ridiculous. The client's cousin, who died after a tattoo, was finished without the right prayer. The neighbor's son, who turned into a wolf because no one sprinkled salt in his wounds. The wise woman from the next village, who swears that only marks made on Tuesdays will bring protection and that any tattoo done on a Friday guarantees eternal toothache. You no longer bother to argue. You have tried, in your more optimistic moments, to gently point out that salt in a wound is more likely to bring screaming than salvation. The answer is always the same. Superstition is the only insurance they can afford. So you play along, your words and gestures as much a part of the service as the ink itself. You have learned to adopt an air of somber authority, even as you mumble invented incantations and wave your hands in gestures you vaguely remember from childhood stories. Once, a client demanded that you draw the mark while blindfolded, trusting entirely in fate. You obliged, and the resulting tattoo looked less like a saint's symbol and more like a worm fleeing a hungry bird. He left satisfied, convinced he had outwitted the evil eye. Sometimes you think that if you were less honest, you could invent a whole new tradition, the artist's blessing, perhaps, or a sacred humming noise. But you suspect your imagination is not quite twisted enough to outdo the accumulated weight of centuries of peasant anxiety. And then there are the customers who arrive after dark, faces hidden, voices hushed, insisting that secrecy is the only protection. They press extra coins into your hand and demand you make the sign of the cross in pig's blood or whisper prayers to saints you have never heard of. You comply, of course. Their fear is genuine, and so is the risk of refusing. You have heard stories. Artists found face down in the mud, mouths stuffed with feathers or horsehair, their bodies marked with crude, angry symbols as a warning to others. You wonder sometimes what it must be like to believe so completely in these things, to think that the world is not governed by hunger and violence and disease, but by the delicate balance of rituals performed in the half light. For your clients, the tattoo is less a piece of art than a thin wall against chaos, a visible line between their fragile bodies and the monstrous world outside. And yet, even as you snip a lock of hair or mutter a prayer, you see the flicker of relief in their eyes when the ritual is complete. For a moment, they believe themselves protected, safe, blessed by the hidden logic of the old ways. You envy them their certainty, even as you scrape the last bits of ash from your fingers and prepare for the next customer. You sometimes wonder if, In your own way, you have become a kind of priest, a midwife for superstition, a craftsman of false comfort. But you know better than to say so out loud. The village already looks at you askance, suspicious of the strange marks you create and the odd tokens you keep. It is better to be the artist who obeys every ritual, who mutters every charm, who takes the coin and says nothing of his doubts. When the day is done and you count your meager earnings, you find a bit of comfort in the rituals yourself. Maybe it is not protection against wolves or spirits, but at least it is something to do with your hands as the night creeps in. You always hear about the importance of clean hands, but that is a luxury reserved for priests, wealthy merchants, and people who have more water than they know what to do with. You, on the other hand, wake up with dirt ground so deep into your palms and under your fingernails that you wonder if it has replaced your blood. Your fingers are cracked, stained with pigment and dried blood, and lined with tiny scars from slips of the needle or run ins with broken pottery. You could try to wash, but there is never enough water for more than a token splash, and even that leaves you shivering in your thin clothes. So you work with what you have. Before each tattoo, you rub your hands briskly on your ragged apron, more to dislodge the visible bits of straw and grime than out of any real belief that it will make you clean. Sometimes, if you are feeling particularly pious, you say a prayer for steady hands and merciful spirits. Sometimes, you just grumble and spit on your palms for luck. There are days when the smears on your skin could be anyone's blood, yours, your last client's, or the sheep you butchered last week for a neighbor. It is all much the same. The clients never complain. They know the state of your hands is the least of their worries. Once the pain begins, cleanliness fades into the background, replaced by the sting of the needle and the slow trickle of blood that mingles with your ink. It is always blood, always a tiny river, seeping from the fresh wound and pooling in the cracks of your table. You keep a dirty cloth nearby to mop it up, but it is never enough. Some days, it seems as though you are waging a hopeless battle against an endless tide. You try to work quickly, but there are limits. When a needle snaps or splinters, you grit your teeth and keep going, using whatever is at hand: a bit of sharpened bone, a pin, even the thorn from a hedgerow if you are desperate. Your clients do not care. They are here for the mark, the magic, the promise of protection. If they flinch or cry out, you do not blame them. You know the pain all too well, having marked your own skin more times than you can count, partly for practice and partly for solidarity. The scars speak for themselves, but the wounds are not always content to stay small. Sometimes, even the simplest tattoo festers. The skin swells and reddens, and the client returns to you with panic in their eyes and a stink of pus that fills your hut. You recognize the signs: a feverish flush, the trembling hands, the way they cradle the wounded limb as if hoping to hide it from fate. You do what you can: drain the wound, clean it as best you can with sour wine or the last dregs of a vinegar jug, and hope the swelling goes down. Most times, it does not. You have lost count of how many customers you have seen limp away, cursing you under their breath, only to disappear from the village a week later, either buried behind the church or hauled off to a healer who promises miracles for a price. Sometimes the infection spreads, climbing up the arm or leg, blackening the skin, drawing a line straight to death. The villagers say it is the work of evil spirits or a curse from the jealous neighbor, but you know better. It is the dirt, the hunger, the impossible odds stacked against every poor soul who comes to your door. Still, you work. You wipe your tools on the same dirty rag, dunk them in a bowl of water that grows murkier with every use, and pray that the next mark will heal cleanly. Sometimes you wonder if you are a tattooist or a butcher, an artist or a bringer of slow suffering. You try not to dwell on it. There is no one else to do the job, and the demand never ends. Bodies are cheap. Hope is even cheaper. You are no stranger to wounds yourself. The tips of your fingers are numb from old burns and new cuts. Sometimes you press on a particularly tender spot and watch a bead of pus rise up, shining in the morning light like a perverse pearl. You know you should stop, rest, let your hands heal. But rest is a myth for people like you, and pain is just another constant companion, as familiar as the ache in your back or the rumbling of your empty stomach. When the work is done for the day, you sit by the dying fire and pick at your fingers, squeezing out what infection you can and hoping the swelling goes down by morning. You chew on a strip of cloth to keep from crying out. The taste is bitter, but you have grown used to it. You wrap your hands in rags and pray that you will still be able to hold a needle tomorrow. Every artist dreams of leaving a mark on the world. Yours are written in blood and filth, on skin that is just as likely to rot away as to carry your art into the next season. You find a certain grim satisfaction in the knowledge that, for all the dirt and danger, you are remembered, if only as a cautionary tale, whispered around fires, of the tattooist with hands like grave soil and the wounds that never healed. The night closes in. Your hands throb with pain, and your tools gleam dully in the firelight. You know tomorrow will bring new clients, new wounds, and the same dirty, endless struggle. There is nothing else for you. You are the artist, the butcher, the healer, and the gravedigger all in one, and your hands will never be clean. You have learned to work with one eye on the door. In this village, really more a smudge on the muddy edge of a lord's forgotten domain, law arrives not with parchment or justice, but with boots and sticks and a taste for trouble. The city watch is never far away, and in the lean seasons, which is to say always, they are hungry for coin, meat, and any excuse to remind everyone of their power. Tattooists, you have discovered, are a particular curiosity for the law. Your hands are still stained with today's blood and pigment when you hear the telltale rattle of armor outside. The knock is different this time, not desperate, not hopeful, but bored and heavy, the sound of a man who knows. You will answer no matter what else you are doing. You open the door with the best smile you can muster, though your jaw aches from too many forced grins. There stands one of the watchmen, or what passes for one here, thick-set, cheeks pocked from old fevers, and eyes forever darting between your face and the table behind you. He has a cudgel at his hip, and a look that says he would like nothing more than to use it. He glances at your tools, the needles, the rags, the bowls of ink, and wrinkles his nose as if the smell of blood is a personal insult. Busy day? He says, though it is not a question. You nod, keeping your eyes down, and try to look harmless. The less you say, the better. The watchman steps inside uninvited, letting his muddy boots mark your floor. He inspects everything with idle contempt, lifting your needles and letting them clatter back onto the table. You watch the delicate points bend and chip, knowing you have no money for replacements. He turns his attention to your latest client, a nervous woman clutching her sleeve. What's this then? He sneers, grabbing her arm and yanking it up to reveal your handiwork, a crude flower inked with shaking lines. Marking witches, are you? The accusation is a familiar one, always just beneath the surface. In a world ruled by fear and rumor, your art is never innocent. A tattoo might be a charm, or a curse, or evidence of midnight pacts with things best left unnamed. The churchmen whisper about the devil's alphabet. The old women in the market cross themselves when you pass. The children dare each other to touch your doorstep and run away shrieking. The watch needs no reason to trouble you. Suspicion is a currency, and you are always in debt. You reply with a practice story. It is a charm for good health, nothing more, an old tradition meant to keep away fevers and bad luck. The woman nods desperately, confirming your tale. The watchman grunts, not satisfied, but not interested enough to press further, at least, not this time. Still, nothing is free. He names a price for his protection. A coin, of course, though sometimes he will settle for a piece of bread, a cut of salt pork, or even a few hours of your labor repairing his own battered spear. You pay, as you always do. You cannot afford not to. He leaves with a final threat about keeping your marks honest and the promise of a visit from the priest if he hears any more complaints. You know that this is no idle threat. There are stories, too many stories, about artists like you vanishing after a midnight visit from the watch, found floating in the river days later, or never found at all. When he is gone, you return to your work with trembling hands. Your client thanks you with downcast eyes and flees before you can ask for payment. You are left with nothing but a half-ruined needle, a cold fire, and the feeling of dirt ground deeper under your nails. You have considered leaving, running to another village, another town, but you know it would make no difference. The law is the same everywhere, and a wandering artist is always an outsider, always the first to be blamed when the milk sours or a child falls ill. The villagers want your art, but resent your presence, and the city watch needs no excuse to remind you that you are, at best, tolerated. Sometimes, when the night is cold and the fire has burned down to ash, You dream of standing up to them. You imagine telling the watchman that you will not pay, that you have as much right to be here as anyone. In these dreams, you always stand tall, your hands clean, your art respected. But when morning comes and the rattle of armor sounds at your door, you remember the stories, the bruises, the lost friends. So you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your hands busy. You work by the thin light of a cloudy window, listening for the next heavy step outside. Every scratch of the needle is a risk. Every client is a potential witness or accuser. Every day you survive is a small, bitter victory. The law may wear a uniform, but its heart is just as filthy as the floor of your hut. You know that one day the city watch will return with a new accusation, a new demand, and perhaps a new cudgel to swing. You tell yourself that you will be ready, but you know the truth. No one is ever ready for the law in a world that was built to keep you afraid. You wash your hands as best you can and light a new fire. You pray it will keep the cold and the fear at bay, at least until tomorrow. On rare days, your world shifts. The knock on your door is softer, or perhaps it is not a knock at all, but a firm command, barked by a servant with clean hands and a cold, appraising stare. Word travels, always faster than disease, always more persistent than hunger, and sometimes the stories about your work reach the stone walls of those who rule rather than those who serve. You know immediately when the nobility wishes to darken your threshold. They never come alone. A minor lord or lady arrives surrounded by a coterie, a fidgeting scribe with ink stains on his cuffs, a lady in waiting who pretends not to breathe the air of your hut, a guard or two whose armor is more for show than for war. Sometimes they arrive on horseback, spattering the mud outside your hovel as if to make certain that the land knows its place beneath them. The contrast is enough to make you laugh if you had not learned to swallow your amusement years ago. The peasants bring nothing but worry and copper. The nobility bring their own problems, pride, gossip, and the ever present risk of displeasure, a risk that, in your line of work, is as lethal as any wound gone septic. A nobleman once requested a tattoo of his family crest, a beast so complex it took you the better part of an afternoon just to sketch the outline. He watched every move you made, eyes flicking from your trembling hands to the battered table to the dirt under your nails. His voice was clipped, each word a thin blade, as he described the colors he required. Not that you had sapphire blue or gold, but you nodded as if you could conjure them from mud and lampblack. Noble clients do not fear your rags, your poverty, or even the rumor that your marks are cursed. What they fear is embarrassment. Their marks must be perfect, or at least must seem perfect to those who see them at the bathhouse or the tournament. The smallest mistake, a falcon with a crooked beak, a letter misshapen, could mean your ruin. More than one tattooist has found himself in the stocks, or worse, for less. They do not sit on your stained bench or bare their skin without complaint. Instead, the process becomes a ceremony of discomfort, an endless parade of wrinkled noses and whispered criticisms. You must hide your frustration, your aching back, your cold hands. You must explain each step as though speaking to a child and answer every question as if your livelihood depends on it. Because it does. A noblewoman once arrived with a retinue larger than the local priest's congregation, demanding a delicate serpent inked around her ankle. Her skin was pale as milk, untouched by the sun, and she flinched at every prick of the needle. Each time you paused to wipe away blood, she recoiled as if you had burned her. You worked in silence, feeling her eyes judging the motion of your hand, the tremor in your wrist, the cloud of failure that seemed to hover over you with every breath. Her guards stood by the door, pretending indifference but watching every movement, fingers twitching at their hilts as if a slip of the needle might be grounds for violence. When you finished, she examined the mark for what felt like hours, then pressed a silver coin into your hand, more money than you had seen in a month, and left without a word. You spent the rest of the day turning the coin over and over, wondering if it would be your salvation or a curse. Noble clients always want more than art. They want secrecy. They want assurances. Some want their marks hidden from spouses, parents, or rivals. Others want symbols you do not recognize. Sigils said to bring luck in the next tournament, or marks to show loyalty to some shadowy cause you dare not name. Each request is another risk, another story that could end with you dragged before a magistrate and asked to explain why you have written forbidden words on the body of a Lord's son. You keep your opinions to yourself. It is safer that way. You do not tell them that their crests will fade, their colors will blur, their proud symbols will become nothing but a smudge of pigment and regret within a season. You do not tell them that the peasant with a crooked cross feels his mark more keenly than they ever will. Payment is never simple either. Some nobles pay in coin, but others offer favors, a letter of safe passage, a promise to speak well of you at court, or once, a bottle of wine so sour that even the rats would not touch it. Refusal is not an option, and gratitude is a word with no meaning here. You accept what is given, bowing lower than your knees can stand, your mouth dry with fear and envy. Occasionally, the visit brings temporary protection. The city watch keeps its distance for a week or two, and your neighbors whisper that you are in favor with the great. But protection never lasts. The next noble who comes might have heard a different rumor, might expect a miracle, might be less forgiving of mistakes. You wash your hands for a little longer after they leave, as if the scent of perfume and danger can be scrubbed away with cold water and the last fragment of soap. You count your coins, if you are lucky enough to receive them, and try not to think about how quickly they will vanish. A new needle here, a piece of bread there, a bribe for the city watch. The brief flicker of privilege fades, and you are left with nothing but the ache in your shoulders and the faint trace of ink on your fingers. In the end, the marks you give the nobility are no more permanent than those you give the poor. Time will blur the sharpest crest, the proudest serpent, the most delicate chain of flowers. What remains is your name, whispered in halls and hovels alike, sometimes in praise, more often in warning. You are the artist, and your art is survival. By midday, you feel the familiar hollowness gnawing at your insides, a hunger that has become a kind of dull background music to your days. If you were a noble, or even a merchant with a roof that does not leak, lunch might mean warm stew or thick slices of bread and cheese, maybe even fruit in season. For you, lunch is simply a word that marks the pause between clients, a small hope that there will be something to eat. You dig through your stores, an optimistic term for the battered wooden box in the darkest corner of your hut, hoping that your last noble client's coin might have stretched farther than your memory. Instead, you find the same sad relics, a chunk of hard bread, older and harder than it was at breakfast, the rind of a cheese, gnawed by mice and pocked with mold, a single onion, so shriveled that it seems to have collapsed in on itself, the ghost of an onion haunting your shelf. Sometimes there are a few beans at the bottom of a sack, but today there are only husks and dust. You consider, just for a moment, trading your last coin for a real meal at the tavern. But you know better. The tavern keeper eyes you like a stray dog, always quick to shout if you linger too long by the door, never shy about making jokes loud enough for the other patrons to hear. Even if you could afford a bowl of gruel, you could not afford the price of their laughter. It is easier to remain invisible, to eat what you have, and save the coin for needles, pigment, or, when it comes to it, another bribe for the watch. So you settle for the familiar ritual, scraping the mold from your bread with your knife, breaking the cheese rind into fragments, peeling the onion, and dividing it into translucent, fibrous rings. The flavors are as sharp and bitter as regret. The bread cuts your gums. The cheese leaves a film of sourness on your tongue. You eat slowly, more from the desire to make the meal last than from any illusion of satisfaction. Hunger will return long before you work again. As you chew, the hut fills with the small sounds of midday, the distant shouts of children, the rhythmic thud of someone chopping wood, the wet slap of laundry against stone. You hear a dog barking, the cries of a rooster, and occasionally the muffled curses of a neighbor arguing with her husband over nothing at all. All of it floats through the single tiny window, mixing with the stink of garbage and human waste that lines the muddy street outside. You share your lunch with the rats, whether you want to or not. They are bold at this hour, slipping through cracks in the wall and blinking their bright, clever eyes at you, as if to ask whether you will fight them for the last crumb. You drop a bit of cheese rind and watch one scamper away with it, fat and confident. You envy the rats in a way. They always seem to find enough to eat, and they do not trouble themselves with pride or shame. Occasionally, a client will leave behind a small gift, an apple already bruised, a turnip still caked in dirt, a scrap of dried fish as tough as leather. These you hoard, rationing each mouthful, turning a meal into a puzzle. How many bites can you stretch it to last? How many days before the mold wins? You tell yourself you are clever, resourceful, a survivor. But there are days when the hunger feels like a kind of defeat, a constant reminder of your place at the bottom of the world's heap. Sometimes, as you eat, you catch sight of your reflection in the surface of your water bowl, distorted, ghostly, eyes too large for your face. You trace the outline of your jaw with one dirty finger and wonder when you last looked well fed. Your cheeks are hollow. Your hands, once steady and strong, are thin and tremble when you hold them out to the light. There is always a new bruise, a fresh scrape, some sign that the world has marked you just as surely as you have marked it. You eat quickly when a client is due, choking down dry bread and bitter onion, scrubbing your hands on your rag in a half hearted attempt at cleanliness. The crumbs fall into the straw at your feet, and you know they will not go to waste. There is always something waiting to pick up what you drop. If it rains, you eat in the dark, huddled by your cold hearth, listening to the drip of water from the ceiling and the squelch of mud beneath your boots. The room shrinks, the cold presses in, and you eat without tasting, simply to fill the emptiness inside. When the sun is out, you sit by the door, staring into the muddy street, watching people pass, some as poor as you, others just pretending. You wonder what they eat for lunch, or if they eat at all. When you are lucky, there are scraps left over from the market, a bruised fruit, a wilted green, something pilfered or traded for a story or a favor. On feast days, if you have done well or the village is in a generous mood, someone might share a piece of meat or a cup of weak beer. But these are exceptions, as rare as a clean shirt or a warm night. Most days, lunch is what it always is, a handful of crumbs, the ache of hunger, and the knowledge that you will do it all again tomorrow. You chew, you swallow, you sigh, and you wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. The world outside is dirty, dangerous, and indifferent. Inside, you do your best to hold back the darkness, one stale mouthful at a time. Lunch is over. Hunger remains, and the day stretches ahead as long and empty as ever. You would think, as the local tattooist, that you would have become numb to the sight of wounds. But every day brings a new test for your stomach and your nerves. The wounds you create, you intend. The ones that follow, you do not. Yet the flesh of the living is fickle, a traitor to even the most careful hands, and your marks are always on the edge between art and affliction. It starts small, as rot always does. A few days after the tattoo, a client returns, their face clouded with worry. They roll up a sleeve or pull down a collar and show you your handiwork, now rimmed with angry red. The skin is hot and swollen, the lines of ink blurring into chaos. Sometimes there is a sour, weeping fluid, yellow and thick, that seeps from the wound. Sometimes the smell is enough to make your eyes water, a sharp tang of corruption, something alive and hungry inside the body. You have learned to hide your own fear. You squint, you prod, You mutter that it is nothing, just the skin adjusting to the ink. Sometimes this is true. Most times you are simply stalling, waiting to see if the swelling will go down on its own, if the fever will break, if the pus will dry up, and let you both go back to pretending this was ever about beauty or protection. You remember every infection. You remember the faces, old men, young women, soldiers, and servants. You remember the little boy who came for a mark to keep away night spirits and returned within a week, fevered and trembling, his mother wailing as you drained the angry pustule on his arm with a knife you heated over the fire. He survived, if you can call it that, but his arm never moved right again. You tell yourself it would have happened no matter what, that it was fate, not your hand, that led to his ruin. The truth is less kind. Infection is as much a part of your craft as needles and pigment. The water is never clean. The air is thick with the breath of too many bodies. The dirt never truly leaves your skin. The rags you use for bandages are washed in the same water as your clothes, your dishes, sometimes even the neighbor's laundry. You have tried everything: herbs and poultices, prayers and charms, even rubbing raw garlic into the wound, as an old wise woman insisted. Sometimes something helps. More often, nothing does. There are worse stories. You have seen men lose their arms to the creeping blackness that starts as a little ache and ends in rot, the flesh turning soft and foul. You have heard of women who died in their sleep, the fever burning them away from the inside out, their tattoos the last bright thing on bodies gone thin and brittle. Some say the ink itself is cursed, that certain colors, especially the blue, especially the green, invite demons into the wound. You would laugh if the evidence did not suggest otherwise. No one comes to you for the truth. They come for hope, for magic, for the comfort of a mark that says, I am protected, I am chosen, I will live another year. You have learned to give them what they want, even as you watch the lines of your art turn soft and runny, as you see a life's story blur into fever and filth. You have learned the words to say: it will pass, keep it clean, pray for strength, burn a bit of sage if you can find it. You say these things, and you believe them a little less each time. You have your own collection of wounds. Scars crisscross your hands and forearms, relics of careless slips and botched self experiments. You have felt the ache of infection climbing up your arm, the red line tracking your veins like a curse. You have spent nights sweating and shivering, pressing hot rags to angry boils, praying not for a miracle, but for the infection to settle somewhere that will not kill you outright. So far, luck, or something that passes for it, has kept you alive. You see your clients grow thin, see the hollow eyed fear when a wound refuses to close. You hear the whispers about the girl who died after you tattooed her wrist, about the farmer who lost a leg, about the strange, sickly color of your own hands. You know your reputation is as fragile as the skin you mark. Some days you wonder how much longer you will be allowed to practice. Other days, you wonder why you bother to care. In the end, infection and death are the true masters here. You are only the apprentice. The grave is always hungry, and the line between healing and harm is as thin as a needle's point. You keep working because there is nothing else. The danger is not an accident, it is the cost of living. At night, when you cannot sleep, you turn your hands in the firelight and study your own wounds, wondering which will heal and which will fester. You tell yourself that art is worth the risk, that you are not just a peddler of pain, but the truth, like infection, always finds a way in. The line outside your door is rarely for tattoos alone. You are the artist, yes, but in this corner of the world, that is only half your job. The other half is less glamorous. Healer, barber, sometimes butcher. When the real doctor rides through on his high horse twice a year, if the roads are good and the Lord's cough is particularly worrisome, he does not stoop to touch the flesh of peasants. That work falls to you, the only person in the village with a steady hand and a few sharp objects. It is almost a joke if you are honest. They come to you to be marked, to be wounded, and when those wounds go sour, they return again, hoping you can unmake what you have done. You have learned to keep your face blank when they show you festering arms and purpled legs, to cluck your tongue thoughtfully as you examine the swelling and the spreading darkness. You have learned to hide your dread. After all, if you cannot fix it, no one else will. Most days, your healing amounts to little more than the performance of hope. You heat your knife over the fire, watching the blade blacken in the smoke, and prepare to lance a boil or open a wound that refuses to close. You do not have the herbs the wise women recommend: comfrey for bruises, wormwood for fever, sage for wounds, but you have scraps of linen, dregs of vinegar, and enough animal fat to make a greasy poultice. If you are lucky, there is garlic. If you are very lucky, there is wine strong enough to sting. Your patients come in all forms. A soldier whose tattooed shoulder has turned red and swollen, a mother with a finger twice its normal size, a boy with a festering cut on his shin. Some are stoic, barely grunting as you dig the pus from their wounds and pack the hole with rags. Others scream and weep, pleading with you to stop or to do more. Sometimes they beg you to pray, and you do, softly, vaguely, just enough to sound convincing. In truth, you are no more a healer than you are a priest. The best you can offer is a clean cut and a steady hand, a whispered reassurance, and the hope that whatever filth lives inside the wound will flee before your client's life does. You have seen miracles. A girl whose fever breaks the night after you open her abscess. A farmer who hobbles away from your door and returns a week later to pay you with a sack of beans. But for every miracle, there are two failures: men and women who vanish into their beds and are carried out again, pale and still, their wounds wrapped in the same rags you used to try and save them. Sometimes the line between art and healing blurs completely. A peasant will ask you to tattoo a charm to make the wound close, convinced that a drop of ink can coax the skin to heal. You oblige, drawing a crude circle around the injury, murmuring a blessing as you work. You know it is nonsense, but what else is there to offer? Hope is your stock and trade, even if it is painted in mud and lies. There are other requests, some more outlandish than others. A desperate mother once brought you her infant, covered in angry red patches, and demanded that you draw away the sickness. You drew a tiny symbol on the child's heel, more out of pity than belief. The rash faded in a week, whether because of your mark or in spite of it, you will never know. The mother swore by your powers to anyone who would listen, and for a few days you were the talk of the village. You made sure to say nothing, letting superstition fill in where medicine could not. You see the toll your work takes on your own body. Your hands are perpetually swollen, joints stiff and raw from years of digging into infected flesh. You feel the ache in your back, the shooting pains in your shoulders from holding down writhing bodies and wrestling with feverish children. The stink of infection clings to your clothes and hair, so much so that you barely notice it anymore. You find yourself examining your own scrapes and sores with the same dread you see in your client's eyes, wondering if this will be the wound that refuses to heal. At night, you dream of cleaner places, brighter rooms where healing does not involve a knife and a prayer. In those dreams, you see yourself as a true healer, skilled and respected, wielding herbs and ointments instead of rags and desperation. In the morning, the dream fades, and you are left with your dirty tools, your aching hands, and a line of clients who believe you can do what the world has never done for them. Offer a little relief, a little hope, a little magic. You do not begrudge them their belief. In a place where pain is cheap and comfort is rare, even the illusion of healing can be worth something. You keep your secrets to yourself, nodding gravely when they thank you for saving a limb or a life, shrugging when they return a week later, sicker than before. You have learned not to take it personally. Healing is a dance with death, and sometimes all you can do is keep moving. You wake each morning to blood and fear, to wounds that will not heal, to prayers that go unanswered. And yet every day they come back, trusting your hands, your art, your lies. You are an artist, a healer, a last hope at the edge of the world. It is not the life you dreamed of, but it is the only life you have. There are moments, usually in the deep night, when the last ember in the hearth is fighting its own losing battle against the cold, when you catch yourself wondering why you ever chose this path. Or, to be more precise, why this path ever chose you. For all the ritual and necessity that surrounds your work, for all the talk of healing and protection, there is a stubborn, bitter voice inside you that asks again and again, is any of this truly art? You remember the first time you saw a tattoo, not as a mark of shame or survival, but as something beautiful. You were a child, peering through a crack in the bathhouse wall, watching a traveler scrub his arms and reveal a riot of colors and symbols, beasts, stars, a snake curled around a tree. It seemed like magic then, a secret language written in skin, promising stories that no one else could tell. You could not have known, pressing your face to the wood, that your own hands would one day write similar stories, or that most of those stories would end in pain, infection, and early graves. Now, years later, you know too much. You have seen your art turn ugly, seen bright lines swallowed by bruises and pus, watched hope dissolve into fever. Some days you wonder if the work is worth the trouble. You trace the marks on your own arms, half practice, half memorial, trying to remember which ones were meant for protection, which for luck, and which you made just to remind yourself you were alive. Clients sometimes ask you what their tattoo means, as if you are not simply a craftsman, but some kind of oracle. They want reassurance that the symbol you prick into their flesh will do more than decorate, that it will change their luck, protect them from harm, keep the darkness at bay. You have learned to answer with whatever they need to hear, that the cross will frighten away fevers, that the bird will give courage, that the circle means unity, and the line means strength. You give them stories, not truths. Sometimes it almost feels like art. There are others who see tattoos as a mark of rebellion or pride, a way to show they belong to a brotherhood of soldiers, to a family that will not be erased, to a village that has survived too many winters. For these clients, your work is a banner. You see the glint in their eyes as you finish, the way they square their shoulders when you wrap the mark. You wish you could share their faith, even for a moment. But there are darker times, too. Days when you stare at the half finished drawing on your bench and ask yourself if you are any different from the rats you share your lunch with. You mark bodies that will not last, skin that will rot, or be hacked to pieces on some muddy field. You are an artist only in the sense that a butcher is. Your medium is blood, your canvas doomed to fail you. The world is not kind to beauty, and even less kind to those who make it for the poor. Sometimes you try to find meaning in the act itself, the scratch of the needle, the careful mixing of pigment, the steady hand that shapes a line where none existed before. For a moment, the world shrinks down to the space between two breaths, the tension of creation, the hope that this time the wound will heal cleanly, that this mark will outlast its bearer by a season or two. In those moments, you almost believe you are making something more than a distraction from misery. But the moments are short and the distractions many. A knock at the door, a whimper of pain, the cough of a client who is already halfway to the grave. You are dragged back to reality, where art is not a luxury, but a necessity, where every drop of ink is a gamble and every mark a promise you cannot keep. You think of the great artists, the ones you have heard about in stories, the sculptors who make saints from marble, the painters who turn walls into heaven. You wonder if they ever doubted their purpose, if they too stared at their hands and wondered if beauty was worth the pain. You suspect they had softer beds, fuller bellies, and less fear in their bones. Your own art is a secret thing, half hated, half loved, born in filth and carried out in darkness. You wonder if anyone will remember your marks when you are gone, or if they will vanish with the bodies you have decorated, forgotten in shallow graves, or burned away with the rest of the village's detritus. Yet you keep working. The questions are always there, lingering like the ache in your hands or the chill in your hut. You chase meaning through each mark you make, searching for some comfort in the thought that your art is not entirely futile. Some nights you almost convince yourself, and then the morning comes, bringing new wounds, new clients, new doubts. You rise, pick up your tools, and begin again. For all the meaning you seek, the world only ever asks one thing of you: to endure. Perhaps that is the real art, after all, not the ink or the line, but the simple, stubborn act of carrying on. Your reputation in the village is a fragile, slippery thing, always teetering between begrudging respect and outright fear. Some days you imagine it as a bowl of water balanced atop a fence post, and in every client is a gust of wind threatening to send it tumbling. A good mark earns you a few quiet nods and perhaps an extra egg in payment. A bad mark, a wound that will not heal, or a line gone crooked, that is a different story. The bowl tips, the water spills, and the consequences are rarely polite. You do not set out to fail, but failure is as much a part of your trade as pigment and bone. Sometimes, no matter how carefully you work, the lines blur, the skin puckers, or the wound opens again. Other times, it is simply the client's expectations, impossible, outsized, shaped by rumor and wild hope, that doom you from the start. Make me a lion, they say, showing you a scrap of parchment or a coin with a noble beast etched upon it. What they receive is a lopsided cat, limping forever around their shoulder blade. Or they demand a delicate flower and get something that looks, at best, like a trampled weed. You have learned to keep your face impassive when you reveal the finished work. Most accept it with a forced smile and averted eyes. They need you, after all, more than you need their approval, and few have the nerve to complain outright. But some clients are not content to stew in private disappointment. Some return days or weeks later, scowling, clutching the mark you gave them as if it were a wound from battle. Look at this, one farmer roared, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a rooster so deformed it might have been a dog. My neighbors laugh at me. My wife refuses my bed. Fix it, or I'll see you pay for the shame. Another time, a young woman arrived with tears in her eyes and a fresh bruise on her face, her husband having decided the mark you gave her was the source of all their bad luck. You patched what you could, smudged new lines over old, mumbled apologies and blessings, but the wounds, those you could not reach, ran deeper than ink. Some clients demand more than repairs. They want revenge for their humiliation, real or imagined. One night, as you made your way home from the tavern, a group of young men caught you at the edge of the alley, their voices thick with beer and resentment. You call yourself an artist? One jeered, shoving you hard enough to send you sprawling into the mud. You ruined my brother's arm, made him look like a fool. Before you could answer, the kicks came, sharp, efficient, practiced. They left you curled in the muck, spitting blood, your tools scattered into the darkness. Physical retaliation is not the only danger. There is gossip, which flows through a village faster than fever. It begins in whispers. Did you hear about the smith's new tattoo? Turned green, never healed right. I heard she draws devils, brings bad luck to the whole house. By the time the stories reach the market, you have been blamed for everything from a child's fever to a cow's stillbirth. Sometimes the priest is called, asked to examine your marks for signs of witchcraft or heresy. You have learned to keep your symbols simple to avoid anything that might be mistaken for a sigil or a hex. But even a cross, done on the wrong day or for the wrong family, can turn the whole village against you. When things go truly wrong, it is not just your reputation at stake. You have seen fellow artists chased out of town, their homes burned, their names blackened for a crooked line or a bad healing. More than once, you have woken in the night to the sound of stones rattling against your door, or found your tools scattered, your meager food stolen or fouled. You sleep lightly, one hand always near a stick or a knife. You wonder sometimes how many artists' bones lie buried under the mud at the village edge, men and women who failed to satisfy, who could not defend themselves against rumor and revenge. Not all vengeance is violent. Some clients take a quieter path, returning to you again and again, demanding new marks to cover the old, never quite satisfied, never quite forgiving. They haggle, they curse, they threaten to spread more tales if you do not oblige them. You oblige as best you can, layering your mistakes atop each other until the original mark is lost beneath a tangle of ink and regret. In your darkest moods, you imagine these people wandering the world, living billboards for your failures. Yet you keep working. You learn to apologize quickly, to placate wounded pride with promises and small gifts, a talisman, a whispered blessing, a coin slipped into a child's hand. You become a master of humility, quick to bow your head, quick to agree that you could have done better, that you will try harder next time. Sometimes you laugh about it with the other outcasts, the tinker, the beggar, the beggar, the old woman who collects bones by the river. A man's only as good as his last tattoo, you joke, showing off a bent finger or a missing tooth as proof of the trade's dangers. But in the quiet hours, with your bruises blooming and your pride bruised deeper still, you wonder how much longer you can balance on the edge, how many more failures you can absorb before someone's revenge is the end of you. For now, you work with trembling hands, eyes always on the door, ears tuned to the next footstep in the dark. Every mark is a risk, every client a potential enemy, every smile a potential threat. This is the life you chose, or the life that chose you, a life spent paying for the mistakes you cannot erase. If there is anything less predictable than the weather or the price of grain, it is the shifting whim of fashion. Even at the ragged edge of the world, Even among mud and lice and unending hunger, people find time to care about what is in, what marks are worthy, what patterns are safe. You used to think art was timeless, that a cross would always be a cross, a bird always a bird. Now you know better. The peasants still come for their humble charms. A fish for protection, a star to ward off fever, the simple cross to show God whose side they are on. But then, one year, a soldier staggers home from a distant campaign with a mark no one has seen before, a spiral, a serpent, a glyph that glows blue green against sunburnt skin. Suddenly, every farmhand and washerwoman wants the same. They press their meager coins into your palm, desperate for something that will make them more than just another hungry mouth. You try to keep up. You listen to stories at the tavern. You sketch unfamiliar symbols on scraps of bone. You experiment with mixtures of pigment, crushed copper for green, soot and oil for blue, strange powders traded by passing merchants. You watch as styles change with the season, as old marks are covered, new ones layered atop bruises and scars. Some designs last a month, some barely survive a single harvest before the next fashion sweeps through the village like a sickness. With new designs come new dangers. You have no books to consult, no master to teach you the meaning behind a symbol, no way to know if what you are drawing is a prayer or a curse. Sometimes you only find out after the fact, when the priest stops by and asks about the foreign sign you have inked on the miller's daughter. Was it the mark of a heretic, a witch? Something to summon ill winds or spoil the cow's milk? You have learned to plead ignorance, to smile and say you only draw what is asked. But there are days you wonder if a slip of the needle will someday send you to the fire. The blue pigments are the worst, new, alluring, and dangerous. You notice that wounds inked with the brilliant powder from the peddler's pouch often heal poorly, turning green and then black. Clients complain of fevers, swollen arms, visions in the night. Some say the pigment is cursed. Others say it is simply poison, but none of them will stop demanding it. What is one more risk in a life built of hazards? And still the demands grow stranger. A nobleman asks for a snake entwined around his thigh, copied from an illustration in a book you cannot read. A merchant's wife requests the symbol of a distant land, convinced it will bring her fortune. You do your best, working from memory, improvising where you must, never certain if you are drawing something holy or something that will mark your client for ruin. The talk in the village turns wary. Children dare each other to get the devil's curl on their arms, then run to you in secret, giggling, eyes wide with excitement and fear. The priest preaches against the false magic of foreign marks, but his own niece appears one morning for a tiny blue star just above the ankle where the old women will not see. You realize that even those who condemn you cannot resist the lure of novelty, the hope that a bit of ink will change their luck. You find yourself longing for the old days when every mark had a purpose: ward off wolves, bring a good harvest, remember the dead. Now, Every week brings a new fad, a new set of clients, and a new set of risks. The language of your art has become a babble, each mark half remembered, half understood, a jumble of wishes and warnings layered onto tired flesh. With each passing season, the work grows more dangerous. The wrong mark in the wrong place can mean more than social shame. It can mean suspicion, exile, or worse. You hear stories of artists in other villages dragged before the magistrate, forced to explain why they painted the sign of the old gods or a heretic star on a local child. You hear of one who vanished after a single tattoo, his house burned to ash, his tools scattered in the mud. But what can you do? You are hungry. You are cold. You cannot afford to turn away a paying client. So you mark what is asked, each time making a small prayer that the mark is only ink, that the stories about curses and heresy are only talk. You wash your hands in the cold water by the door, scrubbing until your fingers sting, hoping to rid yourself of guilt and pigment alike. At night, you lie awake, listening to the wind rattle the thin shutters, your head filled with visions of ink and blood, of angry mobs and silent priests. You dream of simpler times, when all anyone wanted was a charm against the dark. You know those days will not return. Fashion is a tide that will not be stopped, and you are swept along with it, too poor and too tired to fight back. In the morning, another client waits at your door, a servant, maybe, or a merchant's boy with a new design. You greet them with your usual smile, hide your fear, and sharpen your needle. The risks may change, but the work endures. In the end, you tell yourself all marks fade, all fashions pass, and all that remains is survival. By the time the sun slumps behind the patchwork of thatched roofs and twisted trees, your hut has begun to shrink around you. The shadows stretch and thicken, filling every gap between the crooked floorboards and the rickety walls, pressing you into a corner with your bruised hands and tired eyes. Evening in your world is not the soft golden time of poets, but a slow surrender to damp, cold, and the scraping of rats. Still, habit persists. If the weather is not so foul that the mud threatens to swallow your boots, you drift outside at dusk, joining the other local outcasts and laborers around a communal fire at the edge of the village. The fire is more smoke than flame, fueled by whatever scraps can be scavenged, rotten branches, torn baskets, even the splintered handles of broken tools. Sometimes a handful of dried dung is thrown in for good measure. The smell is sharp and acrid, enough to keep the flies away. You take your usual place, a flat stone on the edge, not too close to the flames, lest the sparks find your threadbare clothes. Around you, the company is as familiar as your own shadow. The blacksmith, knuckles knotted and eyes rimmed red from days spent squinting into the forge. The tinker, still smelling faintly of vinegar and regret, forever tinkering with his useless pots. The washerwoman, hands cracked and raw, muttering curses at her own children between swigs from a battered flask. And then there are the rootless, an old beggar with more stories than teeth, a peddler who trades gossip as much as wares, and the odd farmhand dismissed for stealing or for nothing at all. The conversations are as predictable as the fire is unreliable. Complaints tumble out first: the cost of bread, the cruelty of the watchman, the Lord's new taxes, the harvest that failed again. There is laughter, though it is brittle, laughter that sounds like flint on stone. Someone jokes about a neighbor's misfortune, about the priest's wandering eye, about the pigs that broke free and terrorized the miller. Someone else one-ups them with a tale of disaster from a nearby village, famine, fire, or a sickness that swept through like wind. You listen, sometimes adding your own grumbles, but mostly you are content to observe. The others, for their part, find you both useful and slightly suspect. They know your work, who has what mark and where, who hides fresh wounds under their sleeves, who comes to you for healing when the real healer cannot be bothered. They ask about your clients, probing for gossip. Did you see the merchant's boy? That serpent you drew, does it mean he's got money hidden away? Or is it true the baker's wife wanted a star on her thigh? Or was that just a story the miller told? You have learned to answer with shrugs and half truths, to feed the fire without burning yourself. Sometimes you invent stories, miracles mostly, because they please your listeners. Yes, the cobbler's limp vanished after I marked his foot. Or, the widow's fever broke right after she got her charm. These are lies, of course, but everyone wants to believe in the possibility of luck, especially when luck is in such short supply. Now and then, the conversation turns to darker things. A neighbor found dead in the woods, marked with something unfamiliar. A child with a fever no mark could cure. A rumor about witches, about curses, about the signs that should never be drawn. On these nights, you speak less, pulling your coat tighter, watching the faces around the fire for any sign that suspicion is drifting your way. You know how quickly the crowd can turn, how easily laughter turns to accusation. On better nights, the talk drifts to dreams, the almost forgotten hope that things might get better. If the Lord dies, maybe his son will be kinder. If the spring is good, maybe we'll eat our fill this year. You add your own wish, sometimes silently, sometimes aloud, that your hands will heal, that your clients will survive, that you might one day see a place where marks are made for beauty, not out of fear. You sip the thin beer or sour wine passed around, feeling it burn your cracked lips and empty stomach. You rub your hands together, not just for warmth, but for comfort, pressing the grime and ink deeper into your skin. For a little while, the misery is shared, made smaller by the telling. Eventually, the fire burns low. One by one, your companions drift off to their beds, to their corners of the world. The tinker sings a song with too many verses. The beggar mutters a blessing. The washerwoman threatens to curse anyone who wakes her before dawn. You watch the last embers wink out, the red glow swallowed by the dark. You return to your hut, bones cold, the taste of smoke lingering in your throat. For all the bleakness, These evenings are your respite, a reminder that you are not alone, that even at the bottom of the world, there are others scraping by. Tomorrow, the sun will rise and the endless work will begin again. For now, you sleep, if sleep will come, cradled by the memories of laughter and lament, your dreams haunted by the stories shared by firelight. No one who knows you would ever call you adventurous. You do not court danger for the sake of excitement. Danger in your life is a byproduct, like the filth beneath your nails or the ache in your back. And yet sometimes you are forced to travel when the village turns against you for a mark gone wrong, when the priest's sermons get a little too specific, or when too many of your clients wind up dead or changed in ways that cannot be explained by bad luck and dirty water alone. The road, they say, is freedom, but the road for you is a stretch of mud, ruts, and fear, with only the distant promise of another desperate settlement at the end. You pack your tools, bone needles, scraps of cloth, whatever pigment you can scrape from your dwindling supplies, into a sack and throw it over your shoulder. You leave behind whatever cannot be carried: a battered bowl, a cracked cup, a bed of straw that was never really yours. You walk with your head down, listening for footsteps behind you, for the bark of a dog or the cry of a child that might spell trouble. It is not just your reputation you leave behind, but the fragile web of acquaintances and favors that made your life, if not easy, at least possible. On the road, you are no one. Worse, you are a stranger. And in a world that fears strangers, that is the most dangerous thing to be. There are dangers everywhere, of course. The first is the land itself. The road is never flat or smooth. It is an obstacle course of roots and stones, mud and brambles, waterlogged holes that can swallow a careless foot up to the knee. Every step is a negotiation, every patch of ground a possible trap. The weather is rarely your friend. It rains when you have no shelter, it scorches when you have no water, and the wind always finds its way inside your clothes, no matter how tightly you wrap them. Then there are the animals. Wolves, perhaps, if you travel at night, but more often dogs gone wild, or pigs that have learned the taste of flesh. You tell yourself that your luck will hold, that you will hear them before they hear you, but in truth, you know you are as likely to be bitten by a starving dog as by a rat in your old hut. But the real danger walks on two legs. Travelers, too, know to fear one another. There are highwaymen, of course, men with nothing left to lose, who make their living by stealing from those with even less. Sometimes it is only a coin or a crust of bread they want. Other times they want your tools, your coat, your life. You have heard stories of tattooists gutted for the iron in their needles, of merchants found stripped and frozen on the edge of the marsh. You keep to the side roads when you can, though they are rougher and even less traveled. The loneliness weighs on you, but you decide it is better than the risk of company. You try to find work in the villages you pass. Sometimes you are welcomed, especially if there is a wedding coming up or a soldier has brought new stories and new marks from the war. Other times, the headman meets you at the edge of town, flanked by men with sticks and sour faces. They do not want trouble, they say, but they want you even less. You show your hands, your tools, your own faded tattoos. You promise not to draw anything forbidden, not to bring sickness or bad luck. It rarely works. Fear is harder to wash away than blood. When you do find work, it is more of the same. Marks for luck, marks for protection, the same old patterns, and, if you are lucky, a coin or two to show for it. But there is always the risk that someone will remember a story, a rumor, an old grievance. Are you the one who ruined my cousin's arm in that village by the river? Did you mark that thief who ran off with half our wheat? It does not matter if the story is true. All that matters is that you are an outsider, and outsiders are to blame for everything that goes wrong. Sleep on the road is a brief, restless affair. You find shelter where you can, under a fallen tree, in an abandoned shed, sometimes in the lee of a stone wall if the wind is too fierce. You keep your tools close, one eye open for movement, for the creak of a branch or the crack of a footstep. You dream of your old hut, even with its leaks and rats. You wake with a backache, a cough, and the taste of fear thick in your mouth. Once you spent a night in a roadside inn, a rare extravagance, paid for with the last of your silver from a noble client. The other travelers eyed you with suspicion. They asked too many questions about your trade, your tools, the marks on your own skin. You lied, as always, but their eyes followed you until you left at first light, your food barely touched. If you are fortunate, you survive the journey. You find a village desperate enough to need your services, a place where your name means nothing, yet you start over, smiling with all your teeth, hoping no one notices your limp or your trembling hands. The cycle begins again. Marks, pain, suspicion, hunger. If you are lucky, the new dangers are not worse than the old. You sometimes wonder if you will ever settle anywhere, if there is a place where you might live in peace, unbothered by the dangers that follow your work. But the world is not kind to wanderers. The roads belong to the desperate, the broken, and the lost. For now, you keep moving, one foot in front of the other, praying for a roof, a meal, and a day without trouble. Travel in your line of work is never freedom. It is just another way to survive until you cannot. It would be a lie to say there is no joy in your life, but you have learned to recognize joy for what it is, a brief, fragile thing, easily broken, often mistaken for something else entirely. Most days, your pleasures are small and private. The feel of warm sun on your hands, a decent loaf of bread with only a little mold, a rare evening without pain in your joints. Joy, for you, is the exception, not the rule. But then, once or twice a year, the village explodes into festival. The market square fills with people, music, shouting, and the sweet, sour tang of spilled beer and roasting meat. Flags made from scraps of old cloth flap in the wind. Children dart between carts, scattering chickens and mud in all directions. For a day, or sometimes two, the usual order of things is suspended. Even the watchmen loosen their belts, and the priest finds reason to smile. The festivals are rare enough that no one remembers the last one clearly, but everyone tells stories of how splendid it was. For you, festival means business. It means opportunity. It means, most importantly, coins, real coins, not the battered coppers or barter you accept the rest of the year. On these days, you set up your table in the shadow of a food stall, your tools on display, a scrap of clean cloth draped over your shoulder as a show of professionalism. The regulars know you, but festival draws travelers and merchants, young men eager to impress girls, girls daring each other to be braver than the boys, and the occasional drunk lordling looking for a story to tell when he stumbles home. The work is fast, frantic, and sometimes ugly. Everyone wants a mark, but no one wants to wait. The patterns are chosen on a whim: a heart, a star, a pair of crossed swords, a symbol seen on the sleeve of a passing mercenary. No one cares much about meaning. It is about the moment, about proving you were there, about showing off a scar and a story the next day. You do your best, hands moving quickly, hoping to avoid mistakes, praying the wounds will heal despite the dust, the sweat, the spilled beer. You know better than to charge too much. Festival generosity has limits, and the mob is quick to turn on anyone who profits too openly from their brief happiness. But even a handful of coins, honestly earned, feels miraculous. You tuck each one away, hiding them in your sleeve or beneath your ragged cloak, casting nervous glances at the crowd. You know from bitter experience that a festival's joy can sour in an instant. For a few hours, you allow yourself to feel almost equal to the others. You laugh at the jokes, accept cups of weak wine, even join in a song if you have had enough to drink. You watch as the sun sets and the square glows with torches and lanterns, faces flickering in the firelight, the shadows gentler than usual. You remember the feeling, almost forgotten, of being just another face in the crowd, not feared, not needed, not blamed. Of course, joy never lingers. With the festival's end comes the inevitable hangover, the return to normal order, the old resentments and debts. The watchmen remember that you owe them. The merchants remember you are an outsider. The priest remembers the tattoo you gave his nephew. The coins you earned vanish quickly, traded for food, for new tools, for the right to keep working another month. You do not regret spending them. In your world, it is better to enjoy what you have than to hoard it and lose it anyway. Still, you find yourself replaying the festival's moments in your head as you return to your hut, picking at the mud on your boots, the smell of smoke and sweat still clinging to your skin. You savor the memory of laughter, the taste of roasted meat, so rare, so rich it almost hurts your teeth. The thrill of seeing your mark on so many fresh, proud arms. In quieter moments, you reflect on how little it takes to make people happy, how quickly they grasp at pleasure when it is offered. no matter how fleeting or shallow. For a little while, everyone forgets the mud, the hunger, the constant threat of sickness or war. For a little while, even you forget that the future is always uncertain, that joy is always paid for, one way or another. There are other small joys, of course. On a good day, a client brings you a gift, a few eggs, a bit of cloth, a story told in confidence, the kindness of a stranger, the warmth of the fire, a day when your hands do not shake. These are joys too, and you cling to them as best you can, knowing that they are as impermanent as the marks you make. But the festivals, the festivals remain your proof that the world, for all its filth and suffering, can still surprise you with moments of beauty and celebration. You mark the days until the next one, counting the weeks and notches on your table, making small plans for what you might buy, or save, or simply enjoy. You know it will not last. You know tomorrow will bring mud, hunger, and danger. But for now, you allow yourself a little hope, and that too is a kind of festival. You always imagined old age as a kind of distant horizon, a place reserved for village elders, with memories thick as winter fog and knuckles gnarled like ancient roots. But in this world, you arrive at old age earlier than you expect, sometimes before your hair even has the chance to turn gray. Here, old is not a number, but a collection of aches, a slowness in your hands, a heaviness in your bones that settles deeper with each year. You catch sight of yourself in the wavy reflection of your water bowl, or in a scrap of polished tin used as a mirror, and the image is always a little shocking. Your skin, once thick and quick to heal, is now thin as onion peel, mottled with the stories of 1,000 tiny cuts and bites. Your fingers, which once moved confidently over flesh and bone, now tremble as they hold the needle, sometimes from cold, sometimes from hunger, always from the exhaustion that seems to sit in your bones like a curse. It is not just your hands. Your eyes, too, have faded. The outlines that once sprang so easily from pigment and pain are now a blur, a guess, a hope that the line is true even when you can no longer see it clearly. You squint at your work, blinking hard, pretending to your clients that the firelight is to blame. When they ask for fine lines, intricate shapes, you make excuses. Better to keep it simple, easier to heal. Secretly, you dread the day when you miss something important, when your shaky hand and cloudy vision lead to a mistake you cannot undo. Your back bends lower with each winter. The straw mattress that was never comfortable is now a bed of torment, and the cold that seeps in through your walls settles into your joints, making every movement a negotiation with pain. You limp, sometimes from old injuries, sometimes for reasons you cannot name. Every step is slower, every task takes longer. When you see young men in the square, laughing and chasing dogs, you remember the days when you could stand straight and throw a stone farther than any of them. Now, lifting a pot of water feels like an act of defiance. The world, too, seems to move on without you. Fashions change faster than you can keep up. The young want marks you do not understand, symbols you can barely see, painted in colors that did not exist when you first began. They whisper that your marks are old fashioned, that your hands are too slow, that there are other artists in other villages who work faster and cheaper. Some clients, ones who have come to you for years, begin to look elsewhere or try to copy your work themselves, their skin left raw and bleeding in the attempt. You become invisible in other ways. The gatherings by the fire, once so full of laughter and commiseration, now leave you on the edge of the circle, your stories too well worn, your jokes too slow. Even the rats seem to prefer the company of younger scavengers. You watch as friends disappear, some to illness, some to accidents, some simply gone, swallowed by the same mud and anonymity that waits for you. You keep a mental list of the faces you miss, and the list grows longer each winter. Still, you work because you must. The hunger does not care how old you are, and the rent is still due. The watchman still comes knocking for his cut. Each morning, you force your fingers to close around the needle, your eyes to focus, your back to bend. The pain is a companion now, and you measure your days and how much you can endure before it overwhelms you. There are rare moments when your skill returns, a line that lands just right, a client who leaves satisfied. In those moments, you remember the pride you once felt, the sense that your work mattered, that you could shape meaning from pain and pigment. But they are fewer now, flickering like candle flames before the wind snuffs them out. The world is not gentle with its artists, least of all the ones who survive. The younger tattooists have new methods, sharper needles, finer pigments, steady hands that have not yet learned the cost of failure. You envy them a little, even as you pity what they will become. You wonder if any of them will last as long as you have, if their names will survive in whispers, or if, like you, they will be forgotten as soon as their hands grow too unsteady. Some nights you sit by the dying fire and trace your own faded marks, feeling the stories slip away beneath your fingers. You mourn the memories that have vanished, the meanings lost, the people gone. You wonder if the scars you carry are enough to prove you lived, that you tried to leave something behind, even if the world does not remember. You know the end is closer than the beginning now. You do not fear it, not truly. You fear only that you will be left with nothing but pain and regret, that your final days will be as bleak as the mud outside your door. Yet, even in your weariness, you rise each morning, patch your clothes, boil your water, sharpen your needle. You mark the living and remember the dead. In this, at least, you endure. You have become, at last, what you always suspected you would, an old story, muttered by children, half remembered by drunks, recalled by no one whose opinion matters. You are the artist, the relic, the remnant of a world that no longer needs you, and yet, tomorrow, you will work again, because that is what you have always done. And because, for as long as you draw breath, there is nothing else left for you to do. You always thought that endings would come with some warning, some grand finality, a sunset seen from your stoop, the slow fade of your breath in the night, the soft comfort of remembered faces. You imagined you would know when your story was winding down, that you would have time to take stock, to set your affairs in order, to find some peace with all that had passed. Instead, the end arrives like everything else in your life, unexpectedly, quietly, almost as if it is embarrassed to trouble you. Your last days are much like the ones before them. You wake in the dark, bones aching, hands numb, and shuffle to your work table. The tools are heavier than they once were, or perhaps you have become lighter, thinner, hollower, more like the wind that rattles your roof than the flesh and bone you remember. Clients are fewer. Most have gone, buried or driven off, or simply moved on to younger artists with steadier hands and newer stories. The few who remain come out of habit, or pity, or perhaps the strange nostalgia people feel for things already half forgotten. You still work, though it costs you more each time. A mark here, a patch there. Your lines now are more memory than art. When you finish, the clients pay you with apologies, with glances that slide past your face, with stories about better days and better artists. You tell yourself you are grateful for the coin, the bread, the little kindnesses, but each kindness tastes like pity, and you learn to swallow it along with the stale crusts. You look at your own hands, once the most important thing you owned, now trembling, speckled with old scars and new spots. You try to recall the lines of 1,000 tattoos, the feel of a good needle, the pride in a clean, bright mark. Memory fails you. The faces blur together. The marks themselves fade, first from the skin, then from the mind. Sometimes you see a familiar shape on the arm of a passerby, one of yours, worn smooth by years of toil and weather. Sometimes you think you see a glint of recognition, but it never lasts. The world forgets faster than ink can fade. The stories you once told yourself, that your art would outlast you, that your marks would live on, collapse under the weight of the obvious. No one remembers who made the line on their wrist, or why it was made, or what was meant by the little bird, the crude star, the cross that no longer keeps anything away. You are a rumor, a faded name, a shadow that haunts the corners of the firelight. The children in the village know you only as the old tattooist, the one with shaking hands and odd smells, the one their parents warn them about when they stray too close. They dare each other to run past your door, to peep through the cracks, to steal a glimpse of your ghost before you are gone. Some nights you hear them laughing, their voices sharp and clear against the silence of your hut. You envy their certainty, their faith that the world will change, that endings are something that happen to other people. When your end comes, it is a whisper. You simply become slower, smaller, until even your hunger cannot keep you moving. The fire dies early, the roof leaks, the bed is harder, and the cold crawls deeper. The world outside keeps spinning. Markets, births, feasts, famines, without you. Perhaps someone notices your absence. Perhaps a neighbor comes looking for a borrowed tool or an unpaid debt. Perhaps not. In the end, your passing is as unremarkable as your life was. Another mark erased, another name crossed from the ledger, another story left unfinished. What then remains? Not much. The walls of your hut hold the faintest trace of your work, shadows where your clients once sat, stains that cannot be washed away. Your tools rust in the damp, waiting for someone with curiosity or desperation to find them. The few who remember your face do so without fondness or fear, only the mild surprise that you lasted as long as you did. If you are honest with yourself, disappointment is your legacy, not because you failed to change the world, but because the world was never interested in being changed. The art you loved was always fleeting, the meaning always borrowed, the hope always a little too thin to last. Your dreams, like your marks, have faded into the everyday grime. Still, there is a strange comfort in the honesty of it. You did what you could with what you had, and you endured, which is more than most. You marked the living and outlived the dead. You witnessed the passing of time in skin and blood, and in the end, you accepted that nothing lasts, not beauty, not pain, not even disappointment itself. The next child who dreams of making marks will not remember your name. The next artist who picks up your needle will inherit your failures as well as your tools. The world will keep spinning, cold and indifferent, and your story will become, at best, a caution, at worst, a footnote. But for one last moment, you let yourself believe that somewhere, beneath the mud and scars, a trace of your art still lingers, a shadow on the world, faint and fading, but real. And for a fleeting instant, that is almost enough.